motherfucker. So again, this was allegedly written by a former judge who spent 12 years on the bench, and he was trying to help his brother with an IRS tax matter when he started to discover things that he was never taught in law school, purportedly. And towards the end of this, you will find that his eerie predictions have either come to reality or are really close to coming to reality. And it's why I felt the importance and the need to disseminate this information to you guys. So we're going to be talking about mortgages at this point. This is number 3. Oh, I almost forgot. Your lawyer receives a fee from the state for recording your deed for their use and benefit. How do you feel about your lawyer now? Didn't you pay him to represent your interest at the closing? Now you see why lawyers are the brunt of numerous jokes and have such poor reputations. It's because they deserve it. G, foreclosures are nothing more than evictions based on a different kind of fraud. The illusion of a debt, mortgage, which is dead pledge, that never existed. No individual or family who has been foreclosed on and evicted from their home in the United States is legal. No, the only exception to this is owner financing, which means rent to own, or you sign a contract with a private individual to rent to own. Okay. Other than owner finance, the people who purchase their homes through a mortgage company, listen and listen closely, actually owned their homes completely on the day of the closing. The real legal definition of closing means that all legal interest as to title is concluded. See any reputable dictionary from the 1800s. The definition has been changed by our government lawyers to conceal the fraud. Explanation of the above statement. First, you must know that the federal government took America off the gold standard in 1933 during a staged bankruptcy. That's right, he's calling it a staged bankruptcy, called the Great Depression, and replaced the gold with an economic principle known as negotiable debt instruments. That's the Negotiable Instruments Act of 1881, adopted in 1882. Yes, the Great Depression was staged. The government needed to create a catastrophe to implement standards that were designed to steal your possessions and God-given rights. The process of creating a catastrophe was discovered by behaviorists. Take away a person's food, comfort, and safety long enough, and they won't care or question the illusion provided, as long as their stomach is full, they have shelter, a comfortable bed, and the means, real or imagined, to keep or continue their comfort. President Roosevelt unconstitutionally collected America's gold by executive order, which is by law of necessity under military order, and sold it to the Vatican by way of China to conceal its true ownership. The gold in Fort Knox belongs to the Vatican and not to the United States. Absent a gold-based commerce, now essentially trades in debts. So if you borrowed money for a mortgage and there's no gold or real value to support the paper called U.S. currency, what did you actually borrow? Factually, you borrowed debt. The mortgage company committed the ultimate fraud against you because they loaned you nothing to pay off the imaginary balance, not even their own debt instrument. They then told you that you owe them the unpaid balance of your home and that you must pay them back with interest in monthly installments. Here's how they did it. At your closing, the mortgage company had you sign a promissory note in which you promised your sweat, your equity, full faith and credit against an unpaid balance. Then, without your knowledge, the mortgage company sold your promissory note, your credit, to a warehousing institution such as a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, The warehousing institution uses your promissory note, your credit, as collateral and generates loans to other people and corporations with interest. Collateral is essential to a corporation because corporations have no money or credit. They are not real. They are a fiction and require the sweat, the equity, the full faith and credit of the living individual to breathe and sustain the life of the corporation. Corporate governments operate under the same principle. The warehousing institution makes money of the promissory note, your credit, and even though the profits made are nothing more than new negotiable instruments, those instruments still have buying power in the negotiable debt economy. These debt instruments are only negotiable because of the human ignorance of the American people and the human ignorance of the people in other countries of the world who have all been lied to, told this has value, and the people don't know the difference. Did you ever give your promissory note to the mortgage company to sell your credit? Did you ever give permission to the mortgage company to sell your credit? So where is your cut of the profits? If the mortgage company invested nothing of their own in the purchase of your home, why are you making a monthly mortgage payment to them with interest? And where do they get off foreclosing on or against anyone or threatening to foreclose? They do it by fraud, and the masters and their agents, the governments, the courts, and the banks all know it. Everything done to us and against us is about sustaining their lives, the lives of the corporate government they command and to keep we the people under their complete control. They accomplish this control by taking away or threatening to take away your comfort and independence. They all use fraudulent means disguised as law. Note, when you applied for a mortgage, the mortgage company ran a credit check on you, and if you had a blemish on your credit record, they charged you points, money, to ease their pain and lighten the risk, a credit risk, of their loaning you a mortgage. More fraud. Why are you paying points when they never loaned you a dime? The credit report is just another scam. If you have a high credit report, the government and banks identify you as an obedient slave, and yet your promissory note sold for the same value as the promissory note endorsed by the man who is a credit risk. Credit didn't matter. The fact that you are a living person is what matters. More fraud. The mortgage company maintains two sets of books regarding your mortgage payments. The local set of books is a record that they loaned you money and that you agreed to repay that money with interest each month. The second set of books is maintained in another state office, usually a bank, because the mortgage company usually sells your loan contract to a bank and agree to monitor the monthly payments in order to conceal the fraud. In the second set of books, your monthly mortgage payment is recorded by the bank as a savings deposit because there is no real loan. When you pay off the fraudulent mortgage, the bank waits 90 days and then submits a request to the IRS. The request states that someone unknown to this facility deposited this money into our facility and has abandoned it. May we keep the deposit. The IRS always gives their permission to the bank to keep the deposit, and your hard-earned money just furthered the nest of the Rothschilds and Rockefellers and 11 other wealthy families in the world. Equity law, which once controlled America's corporate courts, has been replaced with Admiralty Maritime Law pursuant to Title 28 of the United States Code and the Judiciary Act of 1789. This is the law of merchants and sailors. Under Admiralty Maritime Law, the courts presume you owe the mortgage or the tax, or that you committed a crime defined as a criminal statute, and it is your obligation to prove you're innocent. This means you are guilty until proven innocent, which is the same standard of procedure used in a military court martial. Haven't we always been told you are innocent until proven guilty? Lies, lies, and more lies. We're not free men, we are slaves and bound to our master by adhesion contracts and secret trusts. The goal of the master and their agents are our elected officials is to keep the people oppressed and subservient to them. As the master's agents, they utilize propaganda techniques through government control, courts, and police enforcement. Police officers in America have been pumped full of more bullshit than a manure spreader, and because of their trust, public school conditioning, and training, they haven't the ability to see what is going on. Many have been conditioned by previous military services not to think for themselves, but just follow orders, which makes many of them as dangerous as a terrorist. Now ask yourself, who are the real terrorists in America? Guess what? The Constitution isn't for the police either, and still they are forced to swear an oath to defend it. The more regulations, statutes, and codes created, and the greater the number of regulatory officers and agencies created to enforce them, the greater the master's control over their slaves, and that is mind control by force and threat of force by the very people we rely on to protect and serve. At some point in history, the foreign agents in control of our federal government decided that they needed to create public policy federal police agencies to protect them. I can't blame them. If I was a part of a conspiracy that could result in the American people hanging me for treason, I'd want bodyguards too. Now, if you are one of these public officials, how do you justify the employment and expenses of bodyguards when nobody is trying to injure you and you don't want anyone to know that you are committing treason? Instead of confessing your motives, you must find a way to accomplish your objective and blame it on someone else. Hence, the birth of a bad law, the Volstead Act, and the beginning of Prohibition. Enterprising people began to make money, and others organized. Those who organized became mobs, and when the mobs began killing each other, the freelance bootleggers and innocent people in drive-by shootings, our federal officials sat back and enjoyed the show. They did absolutely nothing until the public was literally breaking down the door of the Capitol building just like they had planned it. The FBI existed before this time. They were a small investigative unit under the Attorney General's office. The agents had no arrest power and were prohibited from carrying guns. Their only authority was to investigate federal employees and make reports to the Attorney General, who then decided if the matter was serious enough to concern the government and whether to prosecute the employee. The FBI was eventually armed, expanded, and provided national jurisdiction to fight the gangsters, none of which would have been necessary had it not been for the Volstead Act. Slowly, the agency has grown into the giant it is now, and ironically, the legislator never authorized their expansion. Everything was done by AG administratively. Where does it say in the Constitution that the federal employee has the authority to create law, create a policy, create a police authority, or expand a current one? Do you see how our government has circumvented the restrictions placed upon them by the Constitution and manipulated the American people? Every catastrophe, calamity, or disaster has been planned and financed by our so-called public representatives with an ulterior motive in kind. The creation of the Homeland Security was done in the same way. A terrorist attack was staged by hired men having connections to the Middle East. I'm not going to go into the conspiracy other than to say that President Bush and the FBI were as guilty as the men who hijacked the commercial airplanes. The director of the FBI confessed to the Congress of his agency involved and of his agency's involvement under presidential order. He was relieved of his position, and Congress took no action against President Bush, and the media did not report any of this to the American people. Treason charges were filed against President Bush, Vice President Cheney, and the FBI by two star generals, by a two-star general from the Pentagon, and no action was ever taken and nothing was ever reported to the American public upon the order of President Obama. This was just another government catastrophe designed to make you, the public, beg the government to come to your aid and protect you. Each time one of these catastrophes are staged, our representatives steal more of our liberties and freedoms from us, but America doesn't care because now they feel safe once again. And that's what these foreign agents want us to believe and feel. We complain today that the government has eroded our rights. It's true because we were lied to directly and indirectly and told to believe something other than the truth. The correct term here is propaganda, and all government-controlled entities and institutions mentioned are quite experts in the use of it. When I was a child, during a period labeled the Cold War, I remembered my teachers telling the class how expert the communists are in the use of propaganda. I can say now with absolute certainty that no one is an expert as the American government. In fact, I believe that our government officials taught the world. I don't blame my teachers. Most of them were subject to the spoon-fed the same propaganda under direction of these foreign agents and corporate entities that now employ them. Our teachers are simply spoon-feeding our children with the same propaganda that was fed to them naturally. If a teacher becomes too creative and steps outside the box or thinks outside the box, the penalty for such creativity is the termination of employment, their future profession, and benefits. Generally, the reason used for termination is failure to adhere to the established curriculum and or meets the needs of the establishment. Who established the needs of and curriculum? Why, the government agents and the U.S. Department of Education acting through the foreign agents representing the masters. During the Bush administration, a treaty called the North American Alliance was negotiated and signed, but the content was not reported to the American public. The treaty guarantees that the boundary lines dividing Mexico and the United States and Canada will dissolve and become one country to be called North America. Upon the installation of the New World Order government, the currency for North America is being manufactured by the United States Mint. They are gold coins called Ameros. I have pictures of these coins being minted. That were taken by an employee and smuggled out. Everything in your life has been controlled from birth, and you are still being controlled. The free thinkers of the world have either been murdered or institutionalized in asylums. Free thinkers are a detriment to the masters and their agents. They have the potential to become martyrs, especially if the populace begins to pay attention to what the free thinkers have to say or teach. Look at what happened to Jesus. John Kennedy, Bob Kennedy, John Kennedy Jr., and Martin Luther King Jr. If you believe John Kennedy Jr. was an accidental death, then you probably believe that 9/11, the attack on the Twin Towers, was a real terrorist attack. If you still think this way, after what you have read, please stop reading. Put your thumb in your ass and close your eyes. You are much too gullible, ignorant, and brain dead to be helped, and you deserve the treatment you and your family are certain to receive. Contrary to popular belief, nothing has changed since the day of Jesus. If Jesus was alive today, he would be declared a terrorist and looked upon locked up in an asylum and slowly poisoned to death through the use of drug combinations that are designed to slowly consume life instead of heal. As long as free thinkers profess their thoughts, they will be institutionalized until their death. Society will be told that these men are dangerous or they will be classified as terrorists. The entire world is a slave plantation, and it is set up under the same principles by the master, the high contracting powers, who have been identified in certain international treaties as the Pope, Vatican, the United Nations, the Queen and King of England or the United Kingdom, and principles of the International Monetary Fund. The upcoming one world government with public representatives and the media have been talking about actually began in 1970 with the passage of the Articles of Confederation. These articles and the principles therein were first suggested in the Magna Carta and later became the foundation of the U.S. Constitution, but they're not for you. The capital city of the world has been identified as New York City according to the United States Code. The United Nations, with the blessings of the Vatican, keeps the world divided and in flux under the principles of divide and conquer, and all religious order within the United States are instructed to keep us passive. People, population, economics, religion, and politics, political agendas of every country on earth are manipulated by the masters, which keep each country in a euphoric flux against the other. Partial proof of such power. We are presently living under the Babylonian Talmud, which was introduced to England in 1066 and has been enforced by the Pope, voracious king, and every religious order since. The Babylonian Talmud represents total and relentless mind control in that people are taught to believe in fictions, things that do not exist. Private international law is now commercial law, which only deals in fictions. Fictions called persons, money, politics, government, and authority. The Uniform Commercial Code, known as the Law of Merchants, which is 6,000 years old, was derived from ancient Babylon and is now private international law. The Uniform Commercial Code, Section 1-201, P.S. Human rights do not exist in fictions. Prior to 1066, many of the king's subjects, lords and dukes, held a lodial deed to land, which are land grants from the king or past kings, and which prevent the present king or his agents from taxing, trespassing, or enforcing his will upon those subjects. Land protected by an allodial deed and improved by a home made the subjects sovereigns in their own right and the king of his castle. In 1066, William the Conqueror defeated England and stole the king's title, his land, and the lands belonging to his subjects. From William I, 1066, to the King John, 1199, England found itself in dire straits because it was bankrupt. During this span of time, parishioners routinely passed their land onto their family or to the churches without the king's permission. So the king invoked the ancient law of mortmain, also known as the dead man's hand, which is our modern day probate law. The Pope and the Vatican objected to the law of mortmain because the king owed the Vatican a lot of gold he had borrowed, and his law now prevented the church from receiving gifts of land. In 1208, England was placed under palpable interdiction, prohibition, and King John was excommunicated. King John was ignorant of the teachings of the Bible and was made to believe by Pope Innocent III that the pontiff was the vicar of Christ, the ultimate owner of everything on earth, and the only one who could grant the king absolution for his sins, providing the king make a substantial gesture of repentance to the Pope and the Holy Roman Church. The word vicar is defined in Webster's 1828 English Dictionary to mean a person deputized or authorized to perform the function of another, a substitute in office, and thereafter all of the popes since Pope Innocent III pretend to be Jesus Christ on earth. In his attempt to regain his stature, King John offered the Pope and the Holy Roman Church his kingdom plus 1,000 gold marks each year as payment of the lease on the land, and he accepted the Pope's appointed representative, appointed ruler, and swore submission and loyalty to the Pope Innocent III and the Holy Roman Church. In 1213, a treaty was entered into between the king and the Pope. The treaty made the king a tenant of his former kingdom and a trustee to the Pope and the Holy Roman Church. The king's ancestors were later appointed treasurers of the Vatican Bank and continue to serve in the capacity to date. See Treaty of 1213 and the Palpables of 1455 to 1492, and the selected letters of the Pope Innocent III concerning England from 1198 to 1216. Thomas Nelson and Sons, Ltd., 1956. In 1215, the barons of England reacted to the loss of their rights and privileges they once enjoyed before the 1213 treaty, and so they revolted against King John and stormed the castle. Under threat of death, they forced him to sign a document that recognized their stature and spelled out their individual rights. The document was named the Magna Carta. When Pope Innocent III was informed by the king about the barons' revolt and the Magna Carta, the Pope condemned the document and declared it null and void. In his written declaration to the barons, the Pope stated that the Declaration of Human Rights embodied in the Magna Carta violated the tenets of the church. Imagine that, a church that does not believe in human rights, but has a prohibition against abortion. I believe that is called an oxymoron. See the selected letters of Pope Innocent III concerning England, 1198 through 1216, Thomas Nelson and Sons, Ltd., 1956. The Treaty of 1783, known as the Treaty of Peace, signed subsequent to the Revolutionary War, was a treaty between King George, the Holy Roman Church, and the representatives of the corporate United States. The opening statement is written in Old English and, when interpreted, means the king claims that the Pope is the vicar of Christ and that God gave the king the power to declare that no man can ever own property because it goes against the tenets of his church, the Vatican, the Holy Roman Church, and because he is the elector of the Holy Roman Empire. This is why no person or company can ever own real estate in America, and the Founding Fathers agreed to that declaration. The Treaty of Verona, which took place on November 22nd, 1822, was another treaty between the King of England, the Pope, and the high contracting powers of the world, and exemplifies the power that the Pope and the Vatican wield in the world, and magnifies their interest in the Republic of the United States. It also explains what has happened to us in America. When we return, we'll be finishing the rest of this out, talking about the Treaty of Verona. Again, this was allegedly created by a former judge who sat on the bench for 12 years. And the reason he got into studying this was his brother asked him to help him figure out some alleged IRS debt. And through this judge's studies, he started to uncover things that he had never learned in law school. And as we get into the Treaty of Verona, he's going to start to explain some things that have already come and pass, things that are to come in the near future. And I believe that his assessment is on point and correct. So I look forward to seeing you guys here for the next video. Again, this was created by a former judge who sat on the bench for 12 years, who was asked by his brother to help him get rid of an alleged IRS debt. And this is what prompted this man to go into an extensive amount of research to figure out what was going on. So we'll be back here after just a bit.